Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk here in southeast Scotland. Everyone knows where Scotland is. It is, of course, the capital of the known universe and other multiverses and dimensions and everything else. Anyway, I hope everyone is doing well. Yes, Danny says, greetings from not the centre of the multiverse. Yes, Scotland, of course, is the centre of the multiverse and other kind of vaguely Scottish nationalistic satire. I hope everybody is doing well and has had a great week so far. Been a good week so far here. It's been nice and quiet, actually. But it's been nice to see the sun out a wee bit as well and for things to be starting to warm up a little bit more. Yes, we're heading towards springtime because it is the 1st of May. That is mental. This year is going so fast. It's quite crazy. And my mic seems my camera seems to have tilted itself a little bit. I'm hoping that that's fixed it a little bit. Anyway, Scotland, the centre of every donut. Certainly on the west coast, I would say that that's definitely true. Okay, me moving the camera didn't really help. I'll have to fix that later. Anyways, suffice to say, folks, I hope everybody has had a great week so far and has been making some music and has been thinking about songwriting and stuff like that. So if you have a question regarding composing, arranging, of course, songwriting, lyrics, music theory, orchestration, all of that fun stuff, instrumentation, whatever questions you might have, then certainly put them in the chat. And the best way to ask a question is to start your question with @JonnyLipshamStudios. Doing that makes the my name highlight in red, and then it's easier for me to pick out questions from amongst the general chat. So if you are here and you are watching and you are not subscribed, you're not going to be able to ask a question until you subscribe. So please do hit that subscribe button and then give it a couple of minutes and the chat will be open to you and you can contribute. It would be great to have your thoughts, your comments, as well as your questions on everything that we discussed tonight. You guys are really, really good at providing me some really good and challenging questions. So I'm hoping that that's what we'll get tonight. So let's go see who was first in the door. And first in the door, I think this is like the second show in a row. It's Christina over in Denmark. I'm pretty sure she did this on Sunday as well. So that would be 2 shows in a row if that's the case. And then we got Billy Morgan, who is about 20 seconds later, I think. I mean, they're timestamped the same, but if I remember correctly, they were about 20 seconds apart. John Hawk is here, Tony Cordona, and Boris Dancy is here, who has the first question of the night. Daryl Harrison is also here. Mike Johnson in the Philippines has just woke up, but he's here. And he's asking about easy keys from Toontrack, which is kind of outside of the scope of this show, but I will, and seeing as we don't really have a whole lot of questions, I will try and get to it, okay? But yeah, that's more of a Sunday Night Live kind of question. Let's see. Papa Raptor Music is here. He says, "Hey boys and first or girls." He means girls. Okay, there we go. I'm very glad to see you here, my friend. It's been a wee while, and I'm glad to see you. And who else do we have here? We got Keith from Radio Top Trumpet, and we've got Don Oliver here as well. And we got Kyle Trajusiak, who possibly has just set a record for saying hello and then that he needs to leave. Yeah, that's pretty cool there, Kyle. We got Danny Taylor, we got Bobby Beard, we got Brett Marler, and we got Simon Carpenter as well, and we got Paul Morgan as well. Welcome, one and all. Please do, as I say, get your questions in. It's what makes this show work. If we don't get any questions, we don't have a show, and I'll just end it, and that'll be the end of that. All right, so we'll get to Boris's question, which is a little bit complicated and might be over the heads of a few of you. Some of you will understand this because we have talked about this before. So I will try and go over how what he is talking about here works, because at first glance, what he is saying here kind of is a little bit technical from a music theory point of view. But actually what he's talking about is something that is really, really useful and helpful, regardless of the style of music you're working in. You don't have to be working in jazz to make this work. You can do this in pop songs. The Carpenters have done this in pop songs. Stevie Wonder does this all the time in pop songs. So yeah, there's a whole range of artists and songwriters who have made tritonal substitution really, really, really very, very, very effective. And so it is definitely well worth adopting. So his question is, I'd like you to discuss and demonstrate the concept or usage of tritones and tritone substitutions to give interest to a typical chord progression, for example, 2-5-1. Sure. Okay, we can do that. First of all, the first thing we need to understand is, what is a tritone? A tritone is an interval of 3 whole tones, and it's kind of derived from the whole tone scale. So if we take a C, like this one here, and we go up to a white note, that is a tone, that is an interval of a tone. And then we go up another one, so we go up another white note, and we got C, D, E. Now, if we go up to the next white note, we're going to get a semitone and not a tone, so we need to do an F sharp here. So that interval there is known as a tritone because it has 3 whole tones in it. It could also be thought of as a flatted fifth, and this is how jazz musicians think of it. If you take the interval of a fifth, there's an interval of a fifth, you know, think hunting horn. It's kind of like got that kind of a sound to it. But if we flat that fifth, suddenly our hunting horn has gone from being forthright and come on, let's go on the charge. It introduces a little bit of mystery. Let's go on the charge, but it might be a little bit scary out there. So maybe we tiptoe on charge instead of full blown. The other use of this interval would be in the Sound, not the Sound of Music, in West Side Story. The song Maria from West Side Story. Which is nice. It's a nice little interval. It's a little awkward to sing, but once you get used to it, you can pretty much pitch it all the time. So, that is what a tritone is. So we need to, when we're talking about tritone substitution, that's what we need to start with, what a tritone is. And you can find these all over the keyboard. So that's one of them. So let's find another one. So let's start on G. We do the same again. Up a tone, up another tone. Again, that's the semitone, so we need the C sharp here. And there's our tritone, our flatted fifth. So, what are we talking about when we're talking about substitution? Okay, so we define the first word, tritone. Second word, substitution. Substitution means to replace, like for like. So if you swap something out, you see this happen on a soccer field, for example, where the manager will strategically substitute somebody that is on the bench with somebody that is on the pitch. Maybe that person is on the pitch, has been on the pitch for quite a whole long length of the game, and you know the manager thinks, hey, we need to get somebody fresh on there who has not been active so much, so we swap them. So we take the player on the field off and we bring on a substitute, a replacement. But it's best if it's like for like. So if you've got a centre forward and you want to substitute your centre forward, you bring on another guy who can do that job, who can do that role. they may well actually be a genuine centre forward, or they may be somebody that is maybe a right winger who who has been a centre forward before and can do that job. And so that's what a substitute is. You're replacing like for like. So we have a tritone and we have a substitution. What's it substituting for? It's substituting for a chord 5 going to a chord 1. This is where it is most useful. There are other scenarios where you can use a tritone substitution, but this is probably the most common one. So let's say we're doing a 2-5-1, which is what Boris is talking about here. So we're doing chord 2, which is built on the second degree of a major scale, to chord 5 to chord 1. It's the best way to end a piece of music. So in the key of C, we're doing D minor, G7, C. And it's kind of how you finish off a song, right? So when we're talking about a tritone substitution, we're talking about replacing chord 5 for a chord a tritone away that will do the same job. All right, so it needs to have some key ingredients. It needs to have things in common with the chord 5. So the substitute needs to have things in common with the chord 5. And the more things in common it has, the stronger that substitute is. So in the case of, seventh chords, dominant chords, you need really at least 2 notes in common. The first, it's not actually the root. The first is the third of the chord. So if we're talking dominance, we're talking the major third. The second thing in common is the seventh of the chord. So if our tritone has these 2 notes in common, it will make an excellent substitute for chord 5. So in the key of C major, chord 5 is G7. Let's take a look at what notes are in a G7 chord, and then we'll take a look at what's in a D flat 7 chord, and we'll see if there are some common tones, common notes. And we'll see whether D flat 7 will work as a substitute for chord 5, G7. So let's take a look at G7. So we have a G, the root. We have the third, a B. We have the fifth, a D. And we have the seventh, the flatted seventh, which is an F. And this always resolves like this. So we've got chord 5 to chord 1. The resolution is actually, there's a tritone right there between the B and the F, and they resolve like that. So we found another instance of a tritone. Tritones are in dominant 7th chords between the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. If I put in the root there, there's your tritone, put in the root. So what we want to do is we want to see if D flat 7 shares these important tones, the 3rd and the 7th of our G7 chord. So let's have a look at what's in a D flat 7. So we're going to have a D flat, which is the root. We're going to have an F, which is the 3rd. We're going to have an A flat, which is the 5th. And we're going to have a B, or a C flat, a B, which is the 7th. Okay, so we've got D flat, F, A flat, B. Remember, we need 2 notes in common with our G7 chord to make a substitution on a tritone work. So what common notes do we have? We have the F and the B. So if I play the G down here, let's move these 2 guys down an octave. Okay, there's our G7. So I have the F and the B in the G7 chord. And now we've just established that we have those same 2 notes in a D flat 7 chord. And would you look at that? The substitute works. So if I complete this and do a D minor 7, and it works. And yes, in a lot of Latin music like samba and bossa nova and mambo, that is a very, very common set of chord changes. So if you are ever considering writing something in that style of samba, bossa nova, or mambo, or salsa, or something like that, that is a really, really common set of chord changes. So chord 2, D minor, D flat 7, to C7, to C or C major 7, which is our kind of home chord. And it works really well. If I do the 2 and then the 5, the G7, and then I'll do the 2 to the flat 2 to 1, you'll see how well this substitute really works. So chord 2, chord 5, 1. Let's do the flat 2 this time. So that is the most common use of a tritone substitution in a set of chord changes, replacing chord 5. By extension, we can do this anywhere. So not just when we're replacing a chord 5 going to chord 1. That's kind of the simplest application. Let's expand our 2-5-1 back the way a wee bit. So what do we get if we go back away? So if we go 1, then 5, then 2, then the next one's going to be chord 6, and then the next one is going to be chord 3. So let's extend this little set of chord changes by a couple more chords. So we'll have chord 3, chord 6, chord 2, chord 5, and chord 1. Where else can we put in some of these tritonal substitutions? So, let's take our chord 3. Now, if I think of this not as 3, but as a 2-5-1 in D minor, which is essentially what it is, then I can substitute my A7 for an E flat 7 because it contains the same common tones as A7. It contains a C sharp and it also contains the G, that tritone. So if I take out the 5th of the chord, and there's our D minor. Alright, so let's go, hang on, hold it. And instead of doing the A, I'm going to do the E flat in the bass. There's the 7th of E flat, and there's the 3rd, which is also 3rd and 7th, other way round, for the A chord. And now we're on that D minor. Well, we also know we can keep going down and we can end up back on C major. So let's play that whole thing together. Now with the substitutions. With And that is another application of tritone substitution. You can apply this in a whole bunch of other ways, which are a little bit more advanced. I mean, tritonal substitution is not, it's not a simple concept. It's easy to apply once you kind of know how to do it. And once you've done it a few times, it's really simple to apply. But, you know, kind of wrapping your head around it is a little bit tricky. Unless I'm very much mistaken, my friend Mike from Studio Unrevealed is here. If he is... Yes, he is. There we go. He says it's 7:15 in the morning and my brain hurts. Hello, Mike, my friend. I'm glad you're here. And as Keith just says, he says, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Burt Bacharach. Yes, exactly. Burt Bacharach is a huge fan of jazz harmony, and he's a huge fan of tritonal substitutions. He uses them a lot. So these work really, really well. And I was going to say something. Oh, yes, I know what I was going to say. So these are really useful for kind of just, you know, when you're doing a simple set of chord changes like 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, for just dropping in a little substitute chord to make the harmony of your song just a little bit more interesting. And it also means if you've got somebody playing a solo, they've got more notes to use than they otherwise would have. Now, a great improviser like Michael Brecker, he would imply these tritonal substitutions even if they were not being played by the rhythm section. And what that made for was for really nice tension and release in his improvised melody lines. Another great guitar player, he's a sax player, but a guitar player such as Pat Metheny. Pat Metheny is pretty much the master of tritonal substitution. He uses them wonderfully well. There are some really advanced techniques that you can go down, even if you're not into jazz. That's okay. You don't have to be into jazz to do this kind of tritonal substitution stuff. You know, if you're into orchestral music, if you're into contemporary orchestral music and writing for film, and you want to have some drama and some tension, you can use these chords. These are not unique to jazz. In actual fact, the bebop guys from the 1940s, people like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, they actually were listening to post-romantic, early 20th century classical music, impressionist music by people like Ravel and Debussy, and they were listening to the chord changes that they were writing into their works, and also people like Tchaikovsky and Berlioz and others. They were listening to that music, and that music is very, very harmonically rich. Charlie Parker was a big Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich fan. That's well documented, and he learned a lot about harmony from those guys. And they then brought that into jazz music. So they took Western European classical harmony and brought that into jazz music. And that's kind of what adds the extra layer of spice to jazz music with what we would now call modern jazz, which is kind of bebop and beyond, really. So that's a really useful application of it. So Billy Joel is another great songwriter, pop songwriter, who makes use of tritonal substitutions. Just check out his hit song, Just the Way You Are. You will find that there are a good number tucked away discreetly within the chords of that great song. So yes, they are really, really useful. I've given you a couple of applications. There, like I said, there are some advanced ways in which you can make this work. For example, a turnaround for a 12-bar blues, which can just add a little bit of spice and surprise. Donald Fagen is a big fan of doing this. I've heard him do this a lot, and I didn't realize this, but he actually got this little harmonic device from listening to Bill Evans. So if we take a blues in G, That's a fairly straightforward, simple 12-bar blues, nothing really harmonically advanced. So you can do this. Lots of tritone substitutions going on there. So at the end, instead of going to chord 5, I went to chord 6, and then I went to flat 6, which then takes me down to chord 5, and then I finally went back to 1, and then for my turnaround I went to chord flat 3, and then flat 6 to flat 2. Flat 2 substituting for my D7 again. Another tritonal substitution right there. Alright, so I snuck in a couple there, even though I was keeping it pretty close to, you know, the basic 1, 4, 5, you know, I kind of had that and there's another one right there. So I hope that helps, Boris, and gives you yet another application. You can put in these substitutions anywhere, and you'll find that once you start really, really understanding how tritonal substitution works, you'll find that you can actually substitute for a bunch of other chords using the same concept of common tones between one chord and the next chord. All you need is common tones, at least 2. Then you can do any substitution for anything. So you can do flat 6 substitutions if you want to. You can do minor third related substitutions, which is something that John Coltrane did a lot of. So yeah, and you know, you'll find that Coltrane was not really original when he came up with doing that. You know, he was getting that from European classical composers quite a lot. You know, Tchaikovsky again, Shostakovich again, Berlioz, Webern and Berg, and you know, other great composers of, you know, 20th century classical music. You'll find all of those harmonic devices there. Kyle says all 12 notes are valid anywhere. They are either chord tones or passing tones depending upon the current chord. Yes, which means when you're improvising, you don't have to think. You don't have to think about, does this scale fit this set of chords, or does this scale fit this chord, and then the next scale fit the next chord, and so on. Yes, you can approach it like that, but it requires a lot of brain power to do that. So all 12 notes, all 12 chromatic tones are available to you when you're improvising. The secret is at the start and the end of your phrase, whatever it might be, is to land on a common tone so that the brain, this is how people listen, this is how people understand music. Just like language, if you use a common word at the start of a sentence and a common word at the end of a sentence, it kind of largely doesn't matter what's in the middle of it. So long as these two words are related, you know, you will understand the whole picture. And this is how people actually listen when they're listening to somebody talk to them. Like, you might be listening to me talk to you right now, and you might be kind of listening to just individual words that pop out in your mind. And you're not really listening to every single word of every sentence, because people don't listen like that. We listen to the context of a whole sentence. and it's the binding words, the joining words in sentences that make it work. And so it is with tritonal substitutions and improvisation. The same kind of things apply. So Just Bob says, what is the best way, in your opinion, to branch out and start introducing new chords and fills to change up your go-to writing style? Good question. It kind of actually depends upon what is your go-to style. What style of music are you working in? Because contextually, some things will apply and some things won't. So you might find if you are into Viking, Gothic, dark, heavy rock, for example, if that's your music, you're probably not going to find a use for tritonal substitutions. And you're not necessarily going to find extended dominant chords in that music either. Because, you know, that kind of music actually harkens back to a pre-medieval period. And so a lot of that music is going to be kind of modal based. It's going to be maybe based out of Gregorian plainsong. And so that kind of isn't going to apply. However, if you're writing just regular pop music, folk, country, blues, bluegrass, straight down the road, middle of the road pop music, you know, kind of Elton John-esque, that kind of thing. There is a certain very short person with, you know, practically a monobrow. I'm avoiding saying his name. You know who I'm talking about. We'll call him CDB for now. That kind of music, if you're writing that kind of music, then yes, you might find a little avenue for this kind of thing. So how do you introduce these things? First of all, you've got to find out how to play those kind of chords. If you're a guitar player or if you're a piano player, then this is where kind of having some understanding of music theory is going to help you. It's going to help you find these chords. But you can just experiment. For example, for a change, if you're playing just a regular little ballad in, let's just say G major, because G major is a nice key and I like it. Everyone knows this song. Everyone knows this song, right? Such an easy set of chord changes, and there was a deliberate pun there, by the way. However, what can we do to make this a little bit more sophisticated? And it's already quite sophisticated. It's got a chord 1, chord 3, chord 4, major 7, to chord 5, which is an 11th chord. And then we go chord 3 to chord 2 to chord 5. So what can we do? We could sneak in a passing little tritonal sub between the chord 3 and the chord 2, just for the fun of it. See what I did there? I put in a little B flat minor. Okay, you can do other things. Let's do a different substitution. Instead of going to the chord 3 minor, let's go to chord 6. We'll make it a dominant with a sharp 9, just because Jimi Hendrix was a big fan of the 7 sharp 9 chord. So let's make use of that chord in this context. So instead of going to chord 3, if we're going up to the 4, it doesn't work, but it certainly does if we're going to go down to the chord 2. However, we could stick in a little A flat 7 there. also change up the chord types as well to make it even more interesting. We're making this more and more jazzy, and I'm sure the guy would not care if we did that, you know? And we could just go on and on. So, how do we introduce all of these? Now, I'm doing this because I've done this forever, but how do you go about finding these chords for the first time? Some of it's just simple exploration, because some of you who are, you're maybe used to certain chord shapes on the guitar. And so for some of these more complex voicings, you're going to have to figure out something a little bit more sophisticated, which means you're going to have to find some bar chords. Now, good news for you, dominant chords, if you bar them, they are a movable shape. So you can move that chord up and down the guitar neck and it's the same chord. This is really handy for doing those tritonal substitutions, because you can go from a minor chord to a 7 chord, and then another minor chord, another 7 chord, and you're just shifting the whole thing down one fret at a time, and you're changing the chord type just by moving 2 fingers each time. So it can be really, really easy to find these sounds. The secret is making each of the voices of the chord move naturally into the other. So, like the... Alright, and you could turn this into a 50s blues ballad. I think it lends itself quite well to that, where you are gonna get into the realms of some quite advanced chords, you know. So you could dress it up in a lot of different ways. And yes, the original was in A flat. Absolutely. I was just demonstrating it in G because, it's kind of a little easier to get your fingers around in G. But, and also it was the same key that I was doing the B flat in, the blues in. A flat's a disgusting key. Nah, I don't agree with that. All right, let's do it in A flat. Yeah, A flat's a lovely key. And it's quite easy for improvisation. You just use the pentatonic scale from the minor third below, which would be F minor pentatonic. And you're away you go. Anyway, what happened when the Commodores met similar Jimi Hendrix? There was a little tension, but soon resolved. That's very cool. I like that. So, yes, the Hendrix chord, everyone calls it the Hendrix chord, is basically a 7♯9 chord, because actually Jimi Hendrix was a bit of a jazz fan. He always was, which is why his drummer was a jazz drummer and his bassist was also a jazz bass player. They both had jazz training. And that's what gave, I think, the Jimi Hendrix Experience its unique sound. Because you had Mitch Mitchell, who basically only stated the backbeat occasionally, and the rest of the time he was just phrasing with what Jimmy was doing on the guitar, and then Noel on the bass was occasionally stating chord tones, but not really that often. It was more like a low counter melody to Hendrix's guitar. Steve Screw says, "Holy Kura Appa, am I ever late? I thought it was still Wednesday, but rolled in here easily, honest." That's too funny. See, I knew as soon as I started doing that. As soon as I started playing that song, I knew I'd start getting some jokes about it. John Hathaway says, "Many of the hard rock and early metal drummers were jazz trained." Oh yes. A lot of the rock drummers. I mean, Charlie Watts, fantastic example of a jazz drummer. John Bonham, another jazz trained drummer. I'm a jazz trained drummer, and I played with a metal band for a whole summer. Boy, did I go through a lot of sticks playing with that band, but man, it was incredible fun. And I was depping for their regular drummer who broke his arm, and so I was sitting in with this band, and they were 3 guitars, bass, lots of distortion, loud, lots of noise, and there was me with my 4-piece kit, and playing traditional grip, and they were just like, just do what you do, and listen to what we do and just do what you do, and just play along, and we'll have some fun with it. And we totally had fun with it for the whole summer. And it turned out that those guys in the band, they were jazz fanatics, but they played the music they played for money. But they were all about jazz, really. That's what they're into. When we were on the way to gigs, we would listen to Coltrane and Miles Davis at a phenomenally loud volume in the van. It was great fun. Let's see. Am I missing anything here? When I accidentally play a wrong note when soloing, I slide up a semitone, and mostly it sounds like I meant to do it and was being clever. By the way, yes, that's actually a pretty good approach, actually, to improvisation. I do it as well. I'll find that maybe I'm accidentally playing a flat 9 chord on a regular major chord, and a flat 9 on a regular major chord is not necessarily going to sound great. There's the flat 9. So I might be going, and when I do that, I'll hold it, and then I'll resolve it. And there was an application of what Carl was talking about, using all 12 tones over a G major chord. But I resolved it, and that's the secret. You can play any note of the chromatic scale and make it work by resolving. So long as you resolve onto a chord tone, it will work. Which is what I did there. I resolved it onto a chord tone. And so it works. All right, we got 9 minutes left here. I'm just going down to see what else people are saying. Bill Bruford and Neil Peart. Yeah, Bill Bruford is a great drummer. And Neil definitely has his place. Certainly, terrific rock drummer, and pioneered a lot of stuff. Like, one of the things that Neil did really, really well, especially when he was in his younger days. Don't think he quite still had it when he was kind of in his latter days, but certainly in his younger days, he had this thing of playing a drum fill across the bar line. and kind of finishing it on like the upbeat of beat 2. So it was a drum fill that went right across the bar line. And I heard in interviews that was something he heard Mitch Mitchell doing with Jimi Hendrix, and he really liked it. So it was just something that he adopted. Let's see. Just Bob says Hendrix Experience Band was high volume, fast-paced jazz with rock and roll kick. Yes, absolutely. Keith Moon and Ginger Baker were awesome. Somehow they managed to play fills as the main drum before the chorus. Interesting thing about Keith Moon. Keith Moon had a really interesting approach to drums. I mean, he never explicitly ever stated that he had jazz training or anything like that. I don't even know whether he had any training, to be honest. But he certainly had some understanding of the music, because, I mean, again, he would do really lengthy drum fills. Like in most pop songs, most rock songs of the era, a drum fill was a bar long, at the most 2 beats long was the kind of standard, and he was like doing 2, 3, maybe even 4 bar drum fills. Think that incredibly lengthy intro to Who Are You? There's some really great drumming on that track. And a lot of those drum fills are really, really long. Neil did 2 albums in tribute to Buddy Rich. Yes, he did. He was very, very highly influenced by Buddy Rich, for sure. And he actually, in later life, he kind of adopted some of Buddy's tunes into what he did. Like, for example, Time Check and stuff like that, and Love for Sale. In particular, Love for Sale was a big thing that he used a lot. But yeah, I don't think necessarily Neil actually had jazz training when he was growing up as a drummer. I think it was kind of something that he maybe came to a little bit later in his life. Mike has to head off. He said that video ain't going to edit itself. It's been awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Mike. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'm glad you made it across. Thank you for your support and your subscription. I appreciate that. All right, we have 5 minutes left, just about. Daryl is asking again about any thoughts on Easy Keys by Toontrack. I don't have it. I've never owned it. I don't really know a whole lot about it, other than it's a little bit like Easy Drummer, in that it has, some patterns and things like that, except it's for keys, for piano and that kind of thing. But that's pretty much about as much as I know about it. Is it useful? Yeah, I think it probably is, especially if you are not a keyboard player. Yeah, he studied with Freddie Gruber in 1994. I'm not gonna pass comment upon Freddie Gruber, to be honest. I know a lot of big name players have studied with him. I know Dave Weckl studied with him for a short period. And I know Steve Smith did as well. And yeah, I think for some drummers, Freddie actually had a good effect on his students. Like, I think Dave Weckl in particular. I think Dave benefited a lot from Freddie and actually adopted some of what he learned from Freddie and applied it to his own way of playing. Whereas I think there are some other drummers that studied with him where I don't think the results were very good. Actually, I think they probably did more harm than good. But, it is what it is. I've been a drum teacher. I've taught a lot of students. I've taught beginners. I've taught drummers all the way, through to university level. And, teaching an instrument is hard because students already come with their own habits and their own idiosyncrasies. Sometimes when you are teaching somebody who has already built and baked in idiosyncrasies into their way of playing, you have 2 choices as a teacher. Number one, you can try and undo and unpick all of those idiosyncrasies and say, those are wrong. You need to do it this way. You can do it like that. Or you can say, those are your idiosyncrasies. Here are some techniques and here are some things that you can do that will help make playing easier for you. So, there are two different approaches that you can take with a student, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. As a teacher, I would never go down the road of trying to unpick somebody's idiosyncrasies and say that they're wrong, unless what they're doing is actually damaging and harmful to them physically, or is actually impeding being able to do certain things. Like if you're gripping the sticks too hard, you're never going to be able to get any rebound, because the stick is not going to be allowed to rebound off the drum head, because your fingers and your hand are closed around the stick, preventing that from happening. So that is something I would correct. But if you've got a more unique kind of thing that you have, that's natural to you, and it actually works, and it actually makes a good sound, then I'm not gonna mess with that. I had a student who held the sticks really, really lightly, almost not holding them at all. You could just like pull the stick out of his hand really, really easily. But here's the thing, it worked for him, and he got a lot of natural rebound, and he was practically throwing the stick at the drum or at the cymbal and catching it. That's how loose his grip was. But he had a lot of control, he had a lot of rebound, and he had a really, really big sound. And, I was just kind of like, okay, you're kind of overdoing it. It's too loose. You need to kind of get a bit more control over it. But that approach didn't work for him. It made him sound worse, not better. So, Anyway, we're getting into the weeds of drum and drum technique and stuff like that. John says the thing with jazz drumming is that it uses a lot of the rudiments. Yeah, it kind of does, but so does rock music as well. I mean, you only have to listen to Steve Gadd playing on Paul Simon's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. I mean, right there, And then, I mean, that's not jazz. That's pretty much straight up pop. And what Steve Gadd does there is pretty rudimental. But yes, jazz drumming does use a lot of rudiments. Anyway, we are done. So yes, Songwriting Simplified kind of morphed into drum teaching and drum rudiments and stuff like that. Sorry about that, everybody. Anyway, John says, I hold the sticks lightly between thumb and first finger and use the fourth finger to add finesse. Tried molar, but it knackered my forearms. Yeah. We can talk on a stream about that, John, because I think I have the perfect remedy for that, because molar was something that I taught, but I also taught natural rebound. And actually I taught an alternative, a different grip, which was with the second finger and thumb, not the first. Because if you grip with the first, you kind of you're stopping the stick from kind of coming back. So that's why second finger, because this finger's out the way, the stick can naturally rebound backwards. So there we go. But to be fair, if you've only ever gripped this way, then it's pretty hard to undo that and switch to a second finger grip. It's not impossible, but yeah. Billy Morgan says there is a meetup, which I think is in an hour's time, unless I'm very much mistaken. I'm just going to click that link and double check that that is the case. And it is in 1 hour. It is the Pennsylvania meetup. So if you guys want to go to that, you are more than welcome to take a wee break from tonight's show and go and check that out. Let me go back over here. But otherwise, we are done for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. We peaked at 26, which is actually really, really, really good for a that's really, really good for a Songwriting Simplified attendance. So thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'll see you on Sunday for Sunday Night Live, where we will talk Studio One and we will talk your questions there. So if you have Studio One questions and questions about Persona's products and how they integrate with Studio One, then we can talk all of that on Sunday, same time, same channel. I will see you all then. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Bye for now. Good night, everybody.